Good evening, everybody. I call to order the Union Finance Committee meeting for Wednesday, March 8th. Here at the Great Plain Room, and we're on Zoom as well. And so the first order of business on our agenda, as it is for every week, is: are there any citizens who want to address the Finance Committee, either here in the room or on Zoom? We're going to go into our next item, which is the approval of the minutes for our last meeting, which was last week, March 1st. People have an opportunity to review them and provide any comments, or do they want to take more time to do that? We can do it next meeting. It's up to them.
I'll move their approval if everyone else is comfortable.
Second by Dick. All right. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none, coming to a vote. All in favor? You do a roll call. I do a roll call, right? Everybody's here. Everyone's here. We're done. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Okay, Sam, two abstains, so the two members who weren't here, Carly and Carol. Okay, those passed. So our next item is our annual consultation with the Community Preservation Committee. I know there's some present people here. Here, Mr. Germany, Mr. Foster. You guys want to come up and anyone? Where you like to sit? Wherever you like.
Do you?
I'm going to have Mr. Germany next to me. He's our vice chair.
Sorry.
Probably easier to move your chair.
Yeah, it would have been something heavy.
Oh, we're good.
Yeah, lots of room.
I'm going closer to you. All right, Peter, you ready?
Yes.
Floor is yours.
All right, do you want me to start? Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm Peter Pingetro. I'm the chair. Or are you going to introduce me? Sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm used to being the chair.
Just don't get too comfortable.
That never happens.
So
in this
we have our
environment.
consultation with the CPC, and you're the chair. So why don't you lead up?
Okay. I had submitted to you a memo dated March 3rd, 2023. If I had more time, it would have been shorter. And it follows each year. I try to learn a little something from my experience in front of you folks. And so I followed the warrant articles as in addressing our issues. So the memo that I have in the proposed presentations, I'll go through the 3 CPC funding requests, as well as, and I'll start with the financing articles on the warrant, which I think we could deal with in short order. And then on the back end, I want to just address the CPA plan, which we've been working pretty assiduously on, and come up with a proposed amended plan. And I've also submitted for you amended policies and procedures plan that we have to kind of show you the work that we've been doing. So we've done a pretty good top to bottom review over the last 2 funding cycles. And this is representative of some of the work that we've done. I polled the committee on each of the articles for funding and for finance. We just minutes ago just came out of another meeting, which went on for about an hour and a half, where we discussed the housing authority request. And so I only have notes of what our discussions were concerning a sense of the committee. So I'm going to speak in only very generalized terms about that, because I want to be fair to both the committee and to you folks and to the proponents regarding the results of that discussion. And also I want the public to know that when we talk about a sense of the committee, it is not a vote. It's just a sense of what our concerns are or what our thinking is. We're still in the middle of the process. It involves a consultation with FinCom and their input, consultation with the select board and their input, a public hearing, which is happening next week, and further deliberations by the committee before we actually vote. So we probably anticipate voting not on March 22nd, but probably on March 29th, bringing it right in under the wire And so, but I think that that's when we'll be voting at that time. I'll start with what I hope are the easier warrant articles, which is appropriations to Community Preservation Fund. And in my memo, I'm just basically cribbing from Dave Jefferson's memo. And we begin by looking at what the estimated revenue is for 2024. It's roughly $4.3 million. And then, as you all know, we have required appropriations to the housing reserve, historic reserves, and also open space. And as you also know, the funding that goes into historic reserves actually never really appears, because in the earlier or part of the warrant, we pay for debt service for projects that are funded through a historic resources reserve. And in the beginning this year, we're paying for debt service for Emery Grover, as well as finishing, or really kind of still in the middle of until 2029, our obligations on servicing the debt for historic restoration of Town Hall. So if you do the numbers, you'll end up with 10% of the anticipated amount. What we do is we allocate 11%, and for each of the required reserves, it ends up being $477,000 and change. We've done in 2022 and in 2023, we appropriated 22% with the hope that the actual receipts would fund at least 20%, double the amount for community housing. The sense of the committee is that we would continue with that. And I propose, or I've given you how that actually works out in under the warrant article, which is basically the community housing reserve will be $955,000. And what happens then is the general reserve is reduced by roughly $477,000. But you can see those figures, I think, on page 2 and 3. And I think Mr. Healy last year actually asked a question about what the current current balances are, and I've included that in the memo. So you can see what the current balances are. The second article is the kind of true up article. Excuse me.
Peter, just you said the 4.3 million is the total estimated revenue. And if I look at the warrant, and it seems to allocate 82,000 for admin expenses and the 2.2 million for community preservation fund reserve, 477 for community housing reserve, 477 for open space. Would the delta then be the amount that is going to pay for the historic?
Yes, it does that. Sorry, I always yes. Okay. You'll notice that it does not add up. That's because earlier in the process, we allocated all of that money to servicing the debt. Yes.
Right, so that delta is the debt.
Correct. It will tally up.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. This next article is where we appropriate a supplemental amount to the Community Preservation Fund, and it's based on additional funding that we received usually just in the prior year. But in this year, in this funding cycle, we're dealing with another allocation that was given to us through the state for FY 2022, relatively small amount of 126,000 that came in immediately prior to last year's town meeting. So what we're doing now is we're adjusting both for the additional $126,313 that's attributable to FY 2022 and an additional amount that came in on FY 2023. I was deliberately vague about that because I didn't know what the actual number was, but I did know what the totals were. And so I can actually figure out what the calculations were. And again, the key question here for CPC is whether or not we would want to follow what we had done in 2022 and 2023, which is to fund community housing sufficient so that 20% of the CPA receipts went into that bucket. And if that were the case, then we're doing the true up for both FY 2022 and FY 2023. The additional amount going into community housing reserve would be $43,030. And the additional amount going into open space would be $21,515. the sense of the committee is to support that. Moving on to the actual request for funding.
Does it make sense to see if we've got any questions on
Yeah,
the
whatever.
mechanics of the allocation?
Yeah, so why don't we do that? Maybe on what's Peter's spoken to so far, if people have questions on. You have
Yes,
anything?
I have several. So of the 4.3 million revenues expected for FY24, I just want to make sure I have this right. You are proposing allocating 955,000 to housing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that is increasing what you might normally do by an additional 477. Is that what you said?
Correct.
And then historic is all going to be taken up in debt service for Emery Grover and Town Hall.
Yes.
And then open space, you are suggesting appropriating 477,000.
Correct.
So the general fund, general reserve or admin, whatever you want to call it, what is that going to?
So then that would, so the general, are we operating under the assumption that we've doubled the amount of community housing, Jim?
Yes,
Okay, so I apologize.
that's all right.
The annual reserve then goes down from 2,227,000 to 1,749,705.
1749.
705.
And that's a reduction of 475, that
477.
477, excuse me, that otherwise would have gone there, but you're putting towards.
Correct.
Right.
I guess it's worth noting that whenever we double the amount of community housing, we're taking it out of general reserves. Okay.
Yeah. So with respect to the general reserve, I'm using the wrong title, I apologize, administrative, whatever you want to call it. So you now have 1.7 million if all this comes to fruition. And what are we doing with that? What is the long-term plan?
So what happens if you, I think what's instructive is to look at the current balances. So if you look at page 3, so our current balances, on page 3 on memo, sorry. Okay. So look at the current balances as of today. And so you'll see what's in the community housing reserve, resources reserve, open space, general reserve, and then CPA free cash. These are, folks know more about this, much more about this than I do, but these are generally open. These are open until June 30th. So whatever we do with those in those two categories, we take care of in this funding cycle. In last year, for example, I think that we drew $2 million out of it to pay for Emery Grover. I think that's what we did. And so this year, we haven't had a full discussion with our finance director, but had some just dialogue with one other member of the committee. And we may be proposing to fund some of these articles out of free cash. So then, of course, if it doesn't get spent, then it's out of circulation until late November. But my understanding, though, is, and this may be further, have another additional question answer, which is my understanding is that the FY 2024 community preservation annual reserve of 1.749 is available even after June 30th. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes, it becomes
So-
available.
So the answer, I just want to add this, which is that we anticipate that in October that the town will come before us and ask us for funding related to Claxton Field. FY 2024-04, which is the Claxton Field request, which has been withdrawn, was a request for $1 million on a total project of roughly $1.8 million. That's now the subject of some negotiation and discussion between the town and the state regarding what cleanup efforts have to be made on Claxton Field. And we don't know the full scope of that project until that discussion is concluded. But we have an understanding that the request of $1 million is not going to change. But what will happen, though, as a result of the fact that there's not going to be this free cash in the general reserve at FY 2023 is not going to be available, we're going to be drawing, I assume, off of the 1.749 general, and that's in our annual reserve. My assumption would be right, Dave. So that's what's going to happen to that money this year.
And so if the 1 million went towards Claxon in October of 2023, that would leave you roughly $750,000 in your balance, at least as of that time frame.
Correct.
In that reserve.
In that particular reserve, right?
I think what you're getting at least I'm trying to anticipate where you're getting at, is it seems like
I'm
if you
trying to
add
go
up,
slowly
if you add
for
up
my
all the
own- my own
reserves,
Yes.
if you're adding up all the reserves, it seems like there's over $6 million. I'm just using very rough
Mhm.
math
Mhm.
in these reserves. And my question, and maybe I'm preempting Jim, is it seems high, it seems higher than we've had before. And what is the plan for that? Because are those funds that we invest? Is this the proper place to carry those types of reserves? What's your committee's thinking on that? I don't know, did I jump in on?
That was very well done.
Well, you know, we're a funding source, so we don't often generate requests for money, right? We respond to the applicants who come before us. And in response to those requests, we have a 5 years financing plan that we work with. So we have tier 1 requests and we have anticipation. We anticipate that requests that are coming down the pike from the housing authority related to their redevelopment efforts and expansion efforts. And we have other plans, we have other expenditures that are coming down the road. What might be helpful is if we turn over to you right around this time of year, we put together an update on our CPA plan for our 5 years going forward. And that may be helpful to turn over to the finance committee. I can't tell you that we have the current ask without a lot of questions about requests still, but the current ask from the housing authority is $1.2 million in this funding cycle, and then anticipated construction financing requests that would actually end up bringing the whole request up to $5 million. What we funded last year, which was 1.386, if I have that number right, the 1.2 this year, and then the delta between those figures and $5 million would be the request by the housing authority. Housing authority requests cannot be bonded, they're not part of our town. And so they would have to be funded out of general reserves or free cash or the community housing reserve.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, it's just an observation, given the limitations on the use to which CPC funds can be put, there's not a lot of other places to move these dollars.
No, I understand that part, but you just look at the thing, for example, open space, right? So let's say you accumulate $5 million in open space. It isn't there now, but if this trend continues, it could. And it seems hard to think that there's going to be open space out there that would be available for the town to purchase through this means for $5 million. Does it come a point in time where we say we should just stop putting money there and look at some of the other things?
So the statute requires their minimum, those reserve accounts, community housing, historic resources, and open space. There's a mandatory requirement of the statute that 10% a year has to be spent or dedicated in a reserve account for use in future years. Now, the statute was amended in 2012, 2014, when it's significantly, well, I don't want to use the word significantly. A lot of people say it significantly expanded the opportunities for using open house and recreational requests. Let's just say this, it has expanded the opportunity to use open space for what was traditionally viewed as recreational expenditures. And so we have a little more flexibility on open space to use it for recreational expenditures. So that's just to respond in part to open space. Some folks, have said, gee, open space should be much higher than that. 1.8 is barely enough to put down a deposit on an opportunity. And if we go through normal funding cycles and normal negotiations, we're never going to be able to actually catch that fish. And so we should have a much larger reserve. I mean, that's just different philosophy. We've always tried to keep it cooking along at $2 million, thinking that that would be a sufficient amount for a down payment and that perhaps we could then move in a different direction to do the acquisition. That's wasn't my brilliant idea, it's just one of those things handed down to me.
Question there, Hogsday. Am I correct that if it's in the reserve account, it can be used for any of the special accounts, right?
So,
But
yeah,
not vice versa.
that's correct.
So what, as a matter of strategy, wouldn't it be best to maintain the maximum flexibility by keeping as much in the reserve account, which then can be moved wherever it's needed?
I think that that's an argument to be made. I think that there was, in terms of increasing the funding to community housing, it was a way of actually making it clear what these accounts are reserve accounts, because what was happening was we were funding, well, we have our spreadsheet that shows the vast majority of these funds were being used for park and rec or historic.
But that was against an identified need that would be coming soon. Makes all the sense in the world for that, but to move it against some possibility down the road doesn't seem to me to be a good planning approach.
I mean, I agree with you in the sense that if we don't have anything coming up, but we've seen projections, and I'm not telling you that this is what we're going to be funding, but we've seen projections of the Housing Authority requesting the equivalent of $10 million over 10 years, or some number that's a fairly steep number that I don't even think that it's not fundable even under this model. I hope that's best I can answer.
With respect to the supplemental amounts that you received, you identified 126,000 that came in FY22 right before the annual town meeting. And then you said, I think, that you expected some funds to come in this year, FY23, but I didn't hear what that amount was.
Oh, what I said was that there were additional funds that came in FY 2023, but that I was not certain of what the additional amount was. So we could tell you that. I think Dave Davison can fill in that blank right now, but I could tell you what the total amount was that came in. So the total of the CPA surcharge and state match is $4,262,146 for FY 2023.
So we were talking about extra funds in FY22, right? They came in before last year's annual town meeting. That was 126K.
Correct.
And then I thought you said, but I could have been wrong, that you expected also some supplemental amount from the state to come in this year, FY23.
Okay, that amount actually did come in. The FY 2023 supplemental money did come in. Dave, what was the additional amount?
The additional amount will be.
Is it in your memo?
Does it add up to the 268 in the article in the special town meeting warrant?
No.
No.
I think no. Well, I'll explain why, but I can explain
About $230,000 more. The point is, the state, it puts it, but it's the bottom line number. Did at least 10% get appropriated for a project, or was it reserved? Because nothing was appropriated for a housing project or an open space project. We have to appropriate that additional money into the reserves for FY23. So the total amount that the town will be receiving in FY23, and when we say the total received, it's a combination of surcharges and state matches. Those two together, 10% must be reserved, because we're looking at $4,262,000 in revenue between state and surcharges for FY23, which ends on June 30th. A minimum of 426,000 has to be put into each one of those reserves. We, of course, put money into those reserves last May. This is just a supplemental amount to get us up to 10% because we got more state money than was anticipated.
So if you look at your warrant, here's where another source of confusion would be. If you look at the warrant article, what we ended up doing was folding in the FY 2022 and FY 2023 additional sums into an appropriation, a total appropriation amount from the general reserve to these special accounts. So what we would, I don't have this in front of me, but if we're going to go with, say, 20% for FY 2022 for community housing, then it would be the sum of $24,434, which is FY 2022, and $43,030, which is a supplemental amount for FY 2023. I think I have that right. Okay, so that's the warrant's confusing because it folds the two in, but we can,
As long as I don't have this warrant article going.
Well, I think the numbers that are in the warrant are wrong anyhow.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're doubling and
Yeah,
they're changing
yeah.
the numbers.
yeah, so, but we have,
So you say, I think it's don't focus on what's in the draft warrant, but just focus on the concept that you.
Yeah.
It's a good concept, but I think Louise can probably handle this one.
okay.
Let's move on to your articles that you're proposing are being.
Okay.
Discuss.
Okay, so the first article is Linden Chambers, and this is a request for an additional sum of roughly $1.2 million to fund a pre-development costs in connection with phase 1 redevelopment of Linden Chambers. In order to understand this article, you have to look back at what was funded in FY 2023, the 02, the award of $1.386 million. So this funding, this funding of roughly 1.2 plus the 1.386 that was funded last year would go to fund all pre-development costs with respect to phase 1. So that is through all architectural and engineering, through zoning, construction documents, negotiating of the financing, setting up of the entities in connection with the low-income housing tax credit structure, and application to DHCD for construction financing and funding. So what I've done is there's a lot of information that we've asked of the proponent, but that's the general concept. I've explained to you in my summary, I really tried to quote the proponent on this, but I tried to explain to you in the summary the distinctions and how the two requests fit
Was any of the
together.
1.2 spent?
I think the short answer to that is no 1.386, Jeff.
No, the 1.2 that we allocated last year.
It's
the other way
1.3. It's the other way around.
Oh,
It's
I'm
1.
sorry. The 1.4 that we allocated last year, was any of that spent?
There has been no request for reimbursement submitted to the town. The contract was signed in mid-January with an A&E firm. And so they have only begun to do their work. I don't know, and I have no idea how much they have done, but that lag, according to the proponent who asked that question, had to do with a lag in obtaining DHCD's approval for the project or entering into the agreement. But
Has the proponent given you a very brief summary of that issue? Because I think town meeting will want to know. We allocated 1.4 last year, apparently not spent. Maybe a great reason why. And so now we're looking to appropriate another 1.2 for a total of 2.6. Here's what you're going to get. And I would assume, hopefully, we're going to get it in FY24. So if they can just give you a little summary of that, that'd be great.
okay, the summary, I want to follow you on that. So did you want a summary when you say that issue? Was it the delay issue or what you're getting?
Issue. In other words, I think town meeting is going to want to say, okay, so we are supporting this effort. I think it was actually unanimous. Town meeting was supportive, trying to make better affordable housing in the Linden Chambers area. They get it, they want it, they understand it. And so toward that end, they approved 1.4 million to go toward that effort. Well, nothing has been done, which could be perfectly understandable. I'm not placing blame anywhere, but I think town meeting will want to know why. So what was the delay? Then the second thing is, you're now asking for another 1.2 million. Well, you didn't spend the first 1.4. So now they're going to say to us, why should we allocate another 1.2 for a total of 2.6? So here's why, and here's what we believe we will be able to accomplish with the expenditure of 2.6.
Okay.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that's what I think town meeting will want to know.
And there will be, so I do want to explain that the 1.2 million request, that's fine. And here's what we'll do with the 1.2 million. And this is what we're going to do. I think that we have that information in front of us. And I don't know that we have a really detailed answer as to why it was that it took this long, except that it was DHCD.
But I think we need a timeline. I'm sorry. I think that that's really what we need is a timeline. It took long for whatever reason, but this is the rate at which we're going to spend and why we need this additional fund.
And
No.
the obvious question that would come up in historically, delay means increased expense. So I think we need to address to what extent we think this delay might cause increased expense to the project.
And since I was the lucky soul that discussed this at the last town meeting, I laid out what I thought was a projection of expected costs for the project. If you're now telling that one of the expected costs that I laid out is no longer 1.4 million, but 2.6 million, I'm going to need to explain why there's a difference of 1.6.
Right.
Now, it could be because it's for entirely new matters and new issues that were not addressed at the last town meeting, but I'd want to know that.
Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit for you right now. Okay, is that all right?
Sure.
So the 1.4 last year was intended to do A&E work through zoning, which means that they were going to do architectural and engineering drawings, and which has a feel of construction. Again, you folks are talking to an expert right here, have a better understanding of this than I do, but sufficient to get through zoning approval. And whatever zoning requirements that they have. That's what we were funding last year for roughly $1.4 million. That money has not been drawn down effectively. They're starting to they hired a contractor. They've actually hired an A&E firm that has familiarity with this town and has dealt with us on multiple projects. Okay, and a DHCD approved A&E firm. So one that we have experience with and one that's been approved by DHCD. The additional $1.2 million takes the project that much forward. And so it actually develops construction documents. It puts the housing authority in a position where it's ready, where the documents are complete through actual financing, through obtaining financing. The entities are set up because this is a low-income housing tax credit set up. The entities are set up. There's an additional line item for additional legal services in connection with that. We have a breakdown of that, and it's a voluminous amount of information that I gave you folks. I apologize for that, but it's a complicated question, and it's a complicated.
But there should be a summary, right, of the voluminous information that shows how the 1.4 million is spent.
Well,
so
okay.
we don't have to read all that. We can just get this. In what you sent us, I can find a summary that says the 1.4 has these components and the 1.3 has these components.
Absolutely, we have it. It's in the material. But if we want a crib version of it, we can ask the proponent. We've made numerous requests to the proponent to give us additional information in different sizes and in different forms, and we can provide that information as well on that kind of thing.
Well, if they signed a contract with the BHA, I think it is, right? Then there should be a scope of work and a budget for that scope of work.
Okay, but remember that's a different contract, right? Because that contract now actually came in we had an estimated amount of 1.0 under the application for $1.4 million. The estimated cost is an estimate cost. The estimated cost for the A&E firm was $1 million. The contract amount, $1.4 million, maybe even north of that. So it's not for additional services. It was actually for what the cost is for what the scope of work that we anticipated paying for through that additional funding. So it was going to be a $1 million contract with the A&E firm, plus the ancillary, vendors related to that, which is going to bring it all up to 1.386. Now, to do the work that we had anticipated being done with that grant last year, it's going to cost an additional $450,000, and that's what part of this money will go to. The other part of it is going to go largely to another tranche of funds being paid to the same firm to bring us forward with the construction documents.
So on that part, let me ask you, is this firm are they going to be basically doubling their efforts? So in the next year, are they going to be doing the $1.3 million worth of work and this year's $1.2 million worth of work? Are they going to be doing that all in the next year? Or is it that we'll sort of delayed a year and so they're not going to be getting to that work until 2024 or 25? And if that's the case, why should we be funding it now?
All right, so that's been a question of ours, except that what we're hearing back from the Housing Authority is that they want to take in a very aggressive approach to all of this, that they anticipate, this is just very recent information for us, but that they anticipate coming back to us for funding in October for construction financing. So based on that timeline,
October of 2023.
yes, for construction financing, which would bring up their total request from us to $5 million. So the request, all this work is going to be done in a very short period of time. It's one of our questions. Our concerns has to do with the timeline of the proposed work, but we don't anticipate that they're not telling us the project is going to be delayed by 9 months. In fact, we're starting to see a timeline which suggests that the project is going to be either right on line with what they had originally proposed or perhaps a little bit shorter. But that's what we're hearing from the Housing Authority.
And yet they haven't actually submitted any requests for reimbursement yet.
They have not.
So do we know if they've actually spent the money?
We don't do, excuse me.
Have they actually?
I doubt that they've spent the money. It's if they signed the contract in mid-January, they're probably.
Have they done anything? I should say.
I'm sure I have no doubt that they're doing something, and they may be doing a lot, but they've only been started. That it's only started, in the recent past.
Mr. Chair, excuse me. So it sounds like there are many vendors involved. Also, I think the Cambridge Housing Authority is involved as well. Is it possible? I mean, I want as much of this money to go towards the housing itself as possible. Is there a risk of having so many vendors and parties involved that some of that is drawn away on administration?
So why don't we leave? Can we put that in a parking lot question, and we'll answer that for you? Okay. We also have a list of all the vendors, who the vendors are. Well, sometimes by grouping. Yeah, we have a list of additional vendors outside of the main A&E vendor, and what the projected amount is going to be paid to them, and a rough description of what the work is going to be. But as far as that question, I think that we're going to reach a point where we're going to maximize my knowledge base on this, and then I'm going to say, I think, you're going to probably want to hear from the proponent itself after this, but I could be wrong. That's what you did last year. Okay.
Who was running the project once again? This was one of the major issues last year.
So my understanding is that Cambridge Housing Authority continues to be in place and is the consultant. And there in that budget is a consultant's fee to be paid to Cambridge Housing.
Well, I figured that, but I think at some point, maybe Mr. Chairman, we need to hear from the person who's running the project, because Peter's doing a great job. This committee's doing a great job. But there's just some questions here that, he can't answer.
I agree with you. And I had anticipated that I didn't want to be presumptuous, and maybe I could have communicated ahead of time and said, look, I'll bring the proponent, but I thought we'd start by having me come in. But if I wasted your time, I do apologize.
No, that's not the point.
Okay.
That's not wasting our time. I think it seems like the same questions we have are the questions that your committee has. You're wrestling with this and trying to make sense of it all. And because the challenge is that everyone in this room and the town meeting, wants the work to take place. the construction work to take place, but it seems like a convoluted way that we're getting there.
So I just finished with this at least, or just is that when we concluded our meeting just an hour ago, I went around the room and did a sense of the committee. There was, I think each of the members, except for one, began with, I have some concerns. And they went along issues of timeline, funding and funding sources and changing of funding and the possibility basically of doing this. And they all were supportive of the project. And so we gave, many of us gave very detailed issues that we thought needed to be dealt with based on our deep dive into these documents. And so the representative of the proponent is sitting at the table with us, was taking notes, and what we agreed to was we have a public hearing next week on the 15th, and on the 22nd we're going to get further answers to those questions, either directly, likely from the representative of the Cambridge Housing Authority. I also I want to let you know that Margaret Moran, who's kind of heading up the effort on the Cambridge Housing Authority, is readily available, has made herself available to us. Will make herself, I feel very confident in saying that she'll make herself available to you. We'll bring in the executive director from the Housing Authority as well, and Steve Merritt, and also Cheryl Gossman is going to be succeeding him. And so they're available. We've asked them a lot of questions. And we plan on continuing to ask Cambridge Housing Authority questions. And so she's available here to come in and speak to you.
Okay.
So who does the housing work in Needham, staff-wise? Do you know?
What is that? What do you mean by that?
Like, do we have someone who works on housing? Didn't we fund someone?
You mean in the town of Needham?
Yeah.
Oh, Karen Sonnenberg?
Mhm.
Yes.
I think it might be helpful to hear from her too about funding.
Who was the consultant's contact in Needham?
So that is kind of the way. I guess the short answer to that is we don't have one. Okay? And so, but we've come to this point where, I guess, I don't know if I'm going to do the right metaphor or not, I'll offend people or not, but the way I view this is we're all on the same team, but we're playing an intramural game. And the Housing Authority has its retained consultant in the Cambridge Housing Authority, and that's their coach. And we need our coach. And I don't know that using a generalist like Karen Sonnenberg to be, because these financing plans are complicated. The expertise is very particularized, but there are people out there that could be answering some of the questions from our side as well. But I also think that it's, I think I just want you to understand that conceptually, because the Housing Authority is not a department of the town. So that's a distinction that needs to be made and be understood.
But that's the problem. We voiced this last year. This was, as much as we want to do this, no one on this committee, I will tell you, wants to do this more than me. But we were concerned whether, and I think I used the word, probably phrase incorrectly, is there a town profession that's acting as our project manager that, the PBBC would have done, if this was that project, or, Mike Retsky in his, before he was the water guy, he ran a lot of the projects here in Needham. And who's, because this is town money. And this is the taxpayer dollars. And even though we are more than willing and happy to give these dollars to create a wonderful new affordable housing, I was concerned, and now I'm even more concerned, that we don't have anyone boots on the ground representing the town of Needham as opposed to the Housing Authority.
So I agree with you. And so I think that we need to get that person in place, either on a contract basis or otherwise. I don't think that it's realistic to have somebody here advising us on this funding cycle. And so that's kind of a concern of mine. My inclination was, to figure out a way to actually push this off so that we could have that opportunity. And so that's, I don't want to treat the proponent unfairly but that's one of those that's one of those discussions that we've had.
Can that money, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair, can we use CPC money to pay for a position that actually would represent the town's interest in this?
We have an
Yes.
administrative budget.
Yes.
So
We
maybe
can.
that is one of our answers in this spring.
But may I ask another question? So I'm gonna, can I just shift gears just a little bit? So you're talking about documents that need to be signed. One, and unless I'm misunderstanding what the transaction is, but part of the transaction is going to require the town of Needham to be a party to the finances that are involved, because because the town has to provide those credits. We have to agree.
So we have a grant agreement.
No, we have a grant for this, but then there's the whole entire financing. Part of the financing is going to be through some credits, I assume. Right? Some tax
So,
credits.
It's a
That's how you
low-income housing.
get, that's
it's a
how you
low-
get private investors to invest
But-
in.
But the entity is going to be the
project.
housing authority, or they're not. We're not going to be a part of that financing scheme.
Not CBC, but I think the town is
The
going to
town
have
is
to
not.
sign off. We're not going to have to
No.
sign off on anything.
They're separate government. They're a separate entity.
Well, we need someone on our side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
So
yeah, I think what we're all saying, from my perspective, I've got to see a better overall management structure for this project to be comfortable recommending adoption of this article. Because as Josh mentioned earlier, the number of players here, it's very easy for this thing to become inefficient. And we've got to be comfortable that someone has got his or her eye on the ball and has the competence to make judgments as we go along. And at this moment, I'm not comfortable with it.
I understand. Understood.
And I think one of the frustration parts is that it's not really dissimilar to the conversation we had a year ago. And here we are a year later and we're kind of in the same place. And that's, at least to me, I'm not speaking for anyone else in the room, is frustrating because I wish we were further along so we could get this good work done. And that's the part that's my seat frustrating.
Well, I understand. I did, well, I'll leave it at that. I understand. Understood, and we'll act accordingly.
So we'll go to your next project now.
Okay. Okay, this this is an application by the Housing Authority having to do with I'll call it the financial re-engineering of Seabed's Way and Cook's Bridge, or Robert Cook Drive, rather. It is an application for $241,052, which is a percentage of the design funds, total design funds in connection with the preservation and restoration efforts of this of Seabed's Way and Captain Cook. The $241,000 is allowable under the CPC, according to the architects and experts that the Housing Authority retained in connection with this application. And frankly, they gave us really detailed information. We don't have reason to dispute it. The reason it's a narrow amount because of the actual particular language in the in the CPA, which limits uses of community housing reserve funds for existing housing for housing units that were not purchased with town funds. and funds can be used basically to do a complete redo, a tear down and redevelopment, or to preserve current funding. And the DHCD, I think you may have been familiar with this from our prior funding request. DHCD has issued a kind of a detailed memo describing what preservation means under the terms of CPA. And so the housing authorities followed that language pretty clearly, and has therefore come up with they have a total budget for the design of the redevelop or preservation and restoration of $1.1 million, and determined that basically there's a rate of 21.25% of that budget is available for funding under CPC, and that's where they come up with $241,052. As I said, this is part of a re-engineering of that reuse of the income stream that they get from HUD, and it's going to create a tremendous opportunity for them to preserve, redevelop, rehab those units. They've agreed with us that they're not going to be asking us for funds in connection with the actual work, the construction work being done, unless something unusual happens. But we don't have a signed warrant from them, but we have an understanding of this is the only request that's going to be coming in connection with this redevelopment project. And so the sense of the committee is very much in support of that. Questions? Oh, sorry, John. Sorry.
It's in support of the warrant article, or I guess it's
for the warrant. Okay, sorry.
Sure thing with the question.
It's late in the evening.
Yeah, it's getting later every minute. What's the work that's being done that you're paying your $241,000?
So if you think of preservation as being as loosely as being work that can be done to keep the building weather resistant and tight.
Repairs and maintenance.
No,
Okay.
hold on, let me finish.
Yeah.
So you think of your roof, your windows, your sidings, your doors, something like that. But certainly easy one is roof and structure. So you hire a design firm to do the rehab of all the roofs, and that comes in at X number of dollars, whatever it is. But under this elaborate or the redesign of all of this work, but they figure out that the roofs are 22% basically of the design work for the rehab of the building. Then they say, oh, okay, that falls under preservation. So that's how we come up with the number.
And who's going to do this work?
I don't think that we have they don't have a signed contract yet, because what they're doing is they just agreed to go down this route. And so let's see if I have my numbers right. So what they describe it as is that they're submitting an application to HUD to change the formula funding that they have. And the plan was to submit the application in December of 2022. They're submitting the application in April of 2023. So they haven't submitted the application yet for the financial re-engineering.
Why wouldn't they put this off until the fall?
Because this one actually where they end up getting approval really early. It's a kind of it's one of these things that they anticipate HUD approving by early summer of 2023. And we have a timeline here.
But how bad? How many problems are we going to create by waiting 3 months? I guess the point is, I'm looking back at the last discussion. I'm looking at this discussion. The application they thought was going to be submitted in December of 22. It wasn't. It's going to be submitted according to you in April of 2023. I understand your comment that there could be a fast track. I don't know if that's true or not. Not that I'm doubting you, but I just don't know if that will happen. And so if we put the money into the general reserve, which I think Dick had mentioned earlier, we now have the flexibility in October of moving it out. At least we're dealing with real numbers then. They don't even have a signed contract. They don't even know exactly what the whole project's going to cost.
All right, I'll just offer this according to their timeline, because it was revised when I'm looking at my notes. it looks like in the fall of 2023, they're going to select and finalize the contract for the A&E firm. So it seems logical to me that they would want the funds now to be used in the fall. And I think October may set them back.
By what, a month or two?
Sure. Jim,
What are the funds available, David? I don't even know. Without an emergency preamble.
The tentative date is October 30th, so the money would be available the third week of November, around Thanksgiving.
So we're talking a delay of maybe a month or two, if that.
okay. So now we're bumping up against, we're drawing down on 1.7. There's 1.7 in our general reserve. 1.0 is going to Claxton, and then another another 250,000 would be going to this project.
Right.
Okay, so it could be funded in that way, right, Dave? Can I just add this, which is that it may be that what we should be doing is the opposite of this, that we should be doing some sort of funding to the degree that we can in October for 01, so that we can get for Linden Chambers, so that we can get some expertise on our side, and we can get some comfort level on our side before we start funding and things. Unless,
is it impossible for us to talk about that issue this town meeting?
It's not possible.
What's
Getting some support from the town of Needham with respect to Linden Chambers. I think that if what town meeting will want to know in May is who is helping Needham run this project. I think that is paramount given tonight's discussion.
The difficulty that we've had just in the short period of time that we've been trying to address this. Well, first of all, we have money in the administrative budget. We have $80,000 that we allocate every year. So we have money available to pay a consultant today. We don't need town meeting approval for that.
Okay, well, I'm just responding to your comment. You said
no. What I'm thinking about is if there's some notion, and I don't want to, if there's some notion that funding for Linden Chambers should be delayed in some way, then I just want to make that, I want to make sure that we have some funds available to keep Linden Chambers going along.
I wasn't suggesting that.
Okay, fine.
But I was suggesting coupling the funding for Linden Chambers with a direct asset for the town of Needham. That's what I was suggesting.
Okay, well,
in May.
We don't need to vote on that in May. Perhaps we can have someone lined up by May. That's because the money is available. Okay.
And what is it that we're looking for, though?
We need to think about that.
Yeah.
And John, I mean, obviously I'd rely on your expertise. And
Because I don't think we need someone for the financial part.
maybe we could consult with, PPVC on what they think.
Yeah.
I don't.
Would there be stipulation to what that person would, when that person would have to be in place for what they would be doing? Would it delay part of that project? If we're asked,
it potentially could, but I think it potentially could, right? I mean, but at the same time, there's a lot of money being asked for that, to Jim's point, is taxpayer money, and I think we all want to make sure it's being spent appropriately, and that you look, for example, at just the use of term zoning. I'm not quite sure what they mean by spending $1 million to get through zoning, and I'm reversing because I'm going back to Linden Chambers, but there's a lot of questions there about the makeup of that budget and what's being spent on what, for what, and what's the deliverable that we're getting. And I think if the town's going to be spending that kind of money, we want someone overlooking that from us to advise us on that, and then as it's being done.
So I would just add to that. That's fine. I think that's fine, but I also think that we have some questions about the actual structure of the layer cake, if you will. So that I think that we need some expertise on our side of the ball on that as well. Could be the same person, could be a firm. But I think that,
I'm not
well,
sorry,
I think that, so I think it's no different than what we would be doing if this were a town project and we had and we're relying on some expertise of the Permanent Public Building Committee. I mean, my understanding is that you actually sit down and you figure out what the financing is and what's the best financing approach and how we're going to do it. What we're faced with is we're presented with this proposal of here's our request, and here is the sources and uses of funds. We're usually involved on the town side, my understanding is, of actually the mechanics of putting together the sources and uses of funds, as opposed to it being presented to us. So that's, I mean, overseeing the expenditures, sure, we could use that. That makes complete logical sense. And that was actually another issue, but that's kind of a separate issue, but that's fine.
But it's also project management work.
Right.
which,
It's
you know,
project management.
we have not only have the PVC, we
I don't
also
think it's
have the Department of Public Works Construction Division.
Right.
That's who runs our projects. It's not just a volunteer body. We've got workers who are employees of the town.
Okay, so I think I need some kind of more comprehensive feedback from you, from this committee, about what it is that you're looking for to oversee this project. And okay,
I'll do that.
okay, all right, let's just, okay.
And I don't think, let me just sum it up, as we need to get moving for some other things, but no one here wants to stand in the way of getting this work done, and the actual construction work. But we're also the stewards of the town's money that's going into it. And I want to make sure, as a steward of the town's money, that the architects who are being hired, what they're being hired for, why they're doing that work, and when they're going to do it. And those are the types of things I think we all want to see. You guys want to see that too.
Correct.
And you sent us a lot of stuff. I guess I have to go through that to find out all those things, but it would seem helpful if the proponents could give us a 3-page, executive summary of that, and tell us right there in those 3 pages, with not, taking all the backup and getting into 3 pages of an executive summary saying of $2.6 million, it is being spent in these ways for these things to be received at these times. And I think if you get it, you would want it, we would want it, and town meeting wants it. And I don't think it's a hard ask or an unexpected ask.
That information is in there, not necessarily, we're struggling a little bit with the timeline, okay? But how we're going to spend the total is in there in a grid format, but the timeline, we need a little more information on that. But that's heard. We'll get you that information. Okay.
I think what we also need is that the 2.6 component is consistent with the expected total cost.
Right.
That's that, rather than because what we started off with $1 million, that became $1.4 million. So if everything is 40% more than we thought, I want to make sure that we're not falling farther and farther behind what is the realizable target.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, I think we need to make sure this is all logical and makes sense, as if it was a project that we were doing for ourselves, because the reality is a year from now, something goes wrong, or this money is not spent efficiently or in the right way, and they come back and we end up looking like, well, it's our money, we spent it, we gave you this money and we expected you to do the right thing with it, and it looks like you did, and shame on us, right? I mean, I think you understand what we're getting at.
I want to be clear that we've dug in enough so that those are all of our expressed concerns, and we've asked many questions about that, and so I will tell you that 8 out of the 9 members began with expressing concerns in some iteration around that when we had our discussion. So I want you to understand that we're taking this seriously, we're digging in, and we have similar, and we have a deep understanding of that, of the fact that this.
But your volunteer committee does wonderful work. I mean, you're dedicated to the town, you're dedicated to the taxpayers and the money that's being spent. But with all due respect, just like the finance committee does its best, I believe that some of the information and subject matter of this is beyond us.
Yes,
That's, I think, what I'm trying to say.
I understand.
That's what I said last year. And I was willing to go along, but now I think we just need expertise.
Agreed.
I just, so I have this much knowledge and experience in this, but Framingham just did this. And there are grant agreements that are signed, that were signed by the city. There should be a grant agreement signed by the town of Needham that includes what the money is going to be used for, that includes limitations on how the money can be used. So I think someone should be developing those for us. It wasn't a standard grant agreement.
Okay.
It was not. And then the housing authority had their financing lined up, and then the project came in over budget. They put it out to bid, and the bid was higher than the budget amounts, and they had to come back and ask for more money. So, and two things happened. The city granted them more money and also loaned them some money. And so I think it, you know, like, it's important to understand that, and who is handling that aspect of it.
Who is handling that aspect of it on the town?
On the
side?
town side.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why I asked for our housing person.
Right, got it. Okay. You're not going to ask me about the plan? Are you going to ask me about the CPA plan?
Not tonight.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know what would be
yeah.
helpful? What would be helpful, if you could redline what the changes are from
You know,
the prior version.
okay. All right. I don't know that that's not, we tried to do that and it wasn't that easy, but we'll figure that out.
Are they both in Word? Or both in
Yeah, I
PDF?
think we did.
We got them in all formats.
Okay.
Fazio.
PDF, Word.
Oh,
Ask
track
the
okay,
machine to do it.
DeFazio. Can I just touch on that quickly?
Yes, then.
So
DeFazio.
DeFazio, sorry.
Okay. Sorry. I know. He taught me wrestling.
Okay, DeFazio.
Of course you did.
Well,
Okay, this is for design funds, $35,000 of the design funds. DeFazio is the only solely top lot in the town, and it's in dire need of renovation. And so it's a request for $35,000 for the design work. And you're going to ask me what the amount is, the anticipated amount for construction. Give me a second. And the anticipated amount for construction is $435,000. If you've been at that site recently, you'll see that it really is in need of repair and redesign. All the little things are kind of spread out. It's area that's kind of subject to kind of conservation restrictions. And so there's high parts and there's low parts, and they anticipate bringing all the top things into the upper corner. But that's the estimated amount. They come to they've done a needs assessment. They've done a full assessment, and it's available online. And this one was one of those that was in kind of dire need to be addressed. So it's kind of on the top of the list of things that need to be repaired and replaced. Okay, us, we're in favor of it. They said that they would anticipate coming back to us for the full $435,000. That money would be coming out of the general reserve. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, can you remind me whose jurisdiction this is under? I remember it was under.
Yeah, that question comes up a lot, but Park and Rec is made the application, and it's a Park and Rec.
DeFazio's got the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Park and Rec. But this particular area is Park and Rec.
Thank you.
All right,
Is this in order
thanks.
for
And
us to vote on?
so then you just,
No, they haven't.
Just a second.
No, we
No.
can't vote on those until these guys.
Right.
Oh,
They
right.
haven't, you haven't voted on any of these.
They may get tomatoes next week. You don't know.
So just to refresh the time, so go back to where we started. You guys have your public hearing on the 15th, and you're anticipating voting on these articles
on the 29th.
Okay, so we're having a meeting on April 4th. So
you want to have, you want representatives of the.
why don't just so you know that we might be
So
coming to you with that.
Sure. Okay, and maybe we'll have some additional information.
And it's off cycle that's a Tuesday night because we can't meet on the 5th because Passover starts that night. And so we're meeting that week on Tuesday the 4th. It's an off cycle night.
All right, and maybe we'll make some progress on getting somebody on our side. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we're going to go back into the town meeting warrant and go through some of the articles that we did last time. First one is public facilities maintenance program.
Yeah.
They're not numbered yet, Carly, unfortunately, so we have to kind of tell you where else it is. You know where it is, David?
It's at the near the beginning of the warrant, it's right after property tax assistance.
So are you on that one?
Yep, back up. And I believe, I don't know if they know, so I'm gonna go, I have a couple of other people.
Yeah, it's like on the third page, it's right on the, it's right after Article 4. Yeah, Article 4, and then it's on the next page.
It might be in the. Maintenance, not infrastructure. You're right. You're right.
I remember hey, he just basic too.
And real quick, just to address one of the previous questions that came up, because I'm also the CPC liaison. The grant agreements are all handled through me and Chris Heap, the town council. So they do have a grant agreement for the previous one. And we do extra stipulations and all of that. Yeah.
All right, so this article is appropriate for public facilities maintenance program. It's an annual article. The amount appropriation is $1 million. And granted free cash $700 from the levy. And I guess we just want a little background on what are any special things going to be done with that money this year, and if so, please tell us.
Yeah. So this is one of those articles that it's requested for FY24, and it really does split between this summer and next summer, and the FY23 that we received at last year's annual town meeting is funding some projects this summer, spring, summer. So for the FY24 one, we're doing our traditional duct cleaning, wood floor refinishing. Those are the annual ones. We cycle through different locations in town on a regular cycle, and then as well as looking at significant flooring replacements in areas where the floor is kind of aging. And we are looking at putting in low to no zero maintenance floors as a replacement to in those certain locations. We've done them in the Broadmeadow and Elliott so far, and they've been working out really great. We are also looking at doing some construction on not the main entrance of the Mitchell, but the side/back entrance. The vestibule itself is kind of deteriorating, and it's in need of pretty significant repairs. It won't really make it through until that building is torn down eventually, fingers crossed. So we will be looking at that, as well as some of the doors inside of that building. The DPW garage, refreshing the restrooms there, doing some minor repairs in that building until we see what the feasibility study, I mean, we all know whatever comes out of that is quite a ways away. And then some fire suppression system replacement. So pretty standard, nothing major specific. This year, the same thing, flooring replacement, duct cleaning. We are looking at doing some repairs at the high school auditorium, and the ceiling needs some repairs, and then replacing a boiler at the Mitchell.
Any questions?
And I will say we have spent down all of the previous money. So we had some outstanding money from the FY22 facility maintenance warrant article. That's all spent down. And we do anticipate the FY23 warrant article this year's being spent down by early spring of next year.
I don't have any objections to this, but before I make a motion, I just want to make sure my colleagues don't have objections.
Well, no objections. I just have two questions. Yeah. How much of this approximately is done in-house and contracted?
I would say most of it's done contracted.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost all of it's contracted out.
So is there, how did you arrive at this number? Why isn't it bigger or smaller?
It used to be kind of a 600-ish thousand that we increased on a regular subject. We went after $1 million once, and we found that that's about the amount project load wise that we've seen that we can handle in 1 year without asking for too much or not enough.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adopt the warrant article to appropriate for the public facilities maintenance program in the sum of $1 million.
Second.
Seconded by Louise. Any questions or comments? We'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimous. Next fund is go back to general fund cash capital, and the two ones we want to talk about tonight. The Center at the Heights generator and then energy efficiency upgrades.
Yeah, so the Center at the Heights generator, we received design funds for that last fiscal year. We're mostly done with the design now. And basically this is to remove the existing portable generator and replace it with one that could actually carry the entire capacity of the building. This facility is used as a heating or cooling center, so that's really important. It's also, we're looking to locate it in a slightly more appropriate location for its intended use. If you look right now, it's taking up the first parking spot in the parking lot. And then as well as currently the portable generator does not have an automatic transfer switch. So if we do lose power, we have to send out our electrician to go manually turn that switch on. This would install an automatic transfer switch. So it would automatically make that connection. And the existing portable generator we are actually looking to relocate it to the library where that could provide assistance.
Is this the complete cost now?
Yes, that's the construction cost. And we have a recent cost estimate.
And you don't need a motion, John, because
No, because it's within all the other ones. We were just cherry picking. Not that that's the right word, but ones to have discussions about. So we want to make sure people have an opportunity here. So any other questions on the generator there? Okay, then the next one we had tonight was the energy efficiency upgrades.
Yes, so this is
down at $250,000 near the bottom of the chart.
Yeah, so this is an annual article that we ask for, and as the article comes up for each approaching year, we identify specific projects. This year, we're looking at replacing boiler number 3 at the high school. We've got a design in place. Basically, this would replace it with a high efficiency boiler that would better suit the school with their summertime reheat functions. So, and cooling the high school, we require the RTUs to subcool the air in order to remove the humidity. And right now we have to run a full-size boiler in order to do that, which isn't cost effective or energy efficient because it does not need a full-size boiler to reheat that air. It just needs a smaller one. So this would actually allow for that ability. I will also say the boiler number 3 is not functioning currently or in poor shape.
It's gone.
So it's not functioning.
It's not there.
So we do need that boiler for redundancy as well.
Any questions from the committee on that item? Okay, so we don't need to take a vote because that we need to complete the whole chart. Yeah. Okay, so we will then move on to the warrant article for the rooftop units at Broadmeadow and Elliott schools.
Yes, so I will let Barry and or Hank lead that one.
Do you have the slides?
So we've gone through numerous options. And maybe you go to the next slide, please. If you can see it, there are 5 rooftop units on top of Broadmeadow School. Those are the white boxes that are up there. There's 4 on top of the Elliott School. They're over 20 years old. They're past the end of their useful lives. There have been numerous repairs, particularly during the last 3 years, that has band-aided them together in order to keep them operating. refrigerant that they use, this R22, is currently banned as a greenhouse gas. So there's no more R22 being manufactured. And there are recurring problems with various pieces within that equipment. All 9 of these have gas as the heating system within the rooftop units. And if you move to the next slide, the proposed replacement, which is required by the new energy code, would include what's called an energy recovery ventilation system, a wheel. There's a diagram of it there. So it takes energy out of the return air as it's being exhausted, and it then returns it and preheats the incoming air, either preheats or pre-cools. This efficiency wheel, or energy recovery ventilation wheel, improves the efficiency of any new unit. And it actually gives us the opportunity to transition away from natural gas and come in with an all-electric RTU. Go to the next slide. Recommendation is that all of the new rooftop units would have these energy recovery wheels. They would have direct expansion cooling, but they would have electric resistance heating as the reheat within the box itself. This RTU is actually less expensive than a replacement in kind, where we to put gas back into those as a heating system. Those boxes would end up being more expensive than this system. Any of these units, because of their energy recovery wheels, will be slightly different size, so there will have to be adapter curbs. So each one of those RTUs sits on a turned up beam, and there are systems that either fan out or fan in order to adapt to the next size unit. We did something similar at the rooftop of the high school on the gym, 3 years ago. But coupled with this would be an air source heat pump, which serves for summer reheat to the VAV boxes. So the same way Barry just described how we'd be saving energy by going to a reheat at the high school, a reheat system that used a separate boiler, more efficient boiler. Here we can use the air source heat pump for that reheating, which means that the boilers that are in the basement don't have to be running all summer. It would allow for it'd be a more efficient system. You wouldn't be running the natural gas through the summer. It would offer the opportunity to do any repairs and replacements during that summer period without shutting the building down. And we would be taking out the rooftop natural gas, and so that would limit and reduce the total amount of natural gas burned in the building. Then the next slide. This anticipated schedule is that we would do one building at a time, starting off first with Elliott, and then moving into Broadmeadow. Elliott construction during the summer of 2024, and Broadmeadow during the summer of 2025. And then the total cost estimate following the feasibility shows we already have prior funding of $817,750. There'd be supplemental funding from the requested $9 million that would take care of the balance of the soft costs. And the contingency in this instance is only based upon the hard costs, not on soft part costs, giving us a total cost for the project slightly under, about 10,000 under the requested $9 million appropriation.
Sorry.
Hank, is there an analysis that shows, you mentioned this is less expensive than a like current, whatever we have currently. But is there analysis that that shows that, and also more importantly, what the expected energy use and cost differential is, roughly, to using this system versus a more traditional system?
Yes, Barry, do you want to speak to that, or it?
Well, we have the documentation. We have the information if it's something that we can send to everybody.
I think it'd be helpful
just
as part of this exercise, because listen, I appreciate that people are going to be like the idea of reducing natural gas, but the reality is the energy cost may not. I just want to make sure that whether if there's a savings, where we know what it is, if there's not a savings, if this is going to be more expensive to operate using current electricity prices versus natural gas, that we identify that and people are aware of that.
They did look at numerous options, not just the two that I described. They even looked at what potential cost would be for geothermal, which was about triple this number.
That's all fair. I just want to make sure we have the information, and that we just make it transparent.
Yep.
Hank, when you use the term they, who's the they?
GGB.
So in other words, the architect you hired, the engineering firm that you hired with the 817, they're the ones. So this is their recommendation.
Yes.
And they looked at other systems, and so their recommendation must be in some sort of document that you could send along to us.
Yeah, it's about 200.
So I know that, but they must have an executive summary. I'm a key executive summary person.
They do have separate pages on the LCCAs that they did, which kind of summarizes the. So you don't have to read through
I don't
all
want the whole report, but
I just think for a town meeting, I think being totally transparent will be important.
Well, also whoever's going to speak to it, it's helpful for he or she to have that information. Just so it makes the presentation more robust, and just you feel you're prepared for everything when you have it. So so that's good. I had a question about, and I know Dick has some questions too on it, so I don't mean to cut you off. I just, is there any reason why we can't do it both in the summer of 24? I mean, because it's we're hiring a company, right, or companies to do it, and it would seem like they're two projects in the same town, and we have enough lead time between now and the summer of 24 to do it if we appropriate this money now. Have you investigated that, and is there a reason why we can't?
Well, it was the design engineer felt that it would be the lead time in ordering these RTUs is somewhere in the range of 40 weeks. So the risk of getting all 9 in location to work on both schools, they felt that it was advisable to do only one school at a time. Now we can research that again.
Yeah, I would ask you to, because I think that we might get some economies by not having 2 separate contracts, but by having one, by having them mobilize at the town at the same time. And I understand the 40 weeks, that makes sense to me, but if this is passed in May, there's enough time for the following summer if you get on it right away with the ordering. And I just wonder if I'd ask them to look at it again, because if we're going to pay for this stuff now, at least get it all ordered. Even if you can't get Broadmeadow until summer 25, if we can get it ordered this summer, we might be able to have some cost savings buying it then as opposed to a year later. So I just asked them to look at that because I think it's something that could get done. I know it requires a lot of work and a lot of planning and a lot of pieces fitting together, but I just asked them to look at that again.
I will say, I think the intent, and Barry and Hank can correct me if I'm wrong, was regardless of if the construction work was done at both schools in one summer or in both, was that it was going to be one contract for very similar reasons.
Yeah, but even still, I mean, if they, I get that, that's good. It should be,
Yeah.
but if there's a way to have them do it both in one summer, that would be good. So.
Sorry, just wanted to follow up to your
Yeah.
question. One other thing we'll have to investigate too is these buildings are largely utilized in the summer for park and recreation and for school, special education, and a few other needs. And typically speaking, we have a very hard time closing both the Broadmeadow and the Elliott down at the same time because they serve the same populations, they provide the same amenities. So we just need to talk to the schools to make sure that that would also work operationally.
Yeah, I'm not demanding it, but I think it would be something that would be worthwhile to give them another pushback just to see what it would be. Dick and then Josh.
Just to follow up on the cost question we've discussed earlier, the new HVAC systems are more sophisticated, therefore require more expensive maintenance. Should we expect the same here?
No, it'll be similar maintenance. Their machines are generally built the same way. They all have pretty much the same components, although they're a little bit more technology driven. We have a prediction on what the estimated maintenance costs will be per year for each school. We don't see a significant change.
So this time last year, I remember the cost estimates were much lower, I think between 5 and 6 million. What are the reasons for the increase in costs?
Materials, I guess.
Both materials and labor.
Yeah.
And the continued escalation. Now these are feasibility study estimates, and it's possible if we get a recession and bid at the same time that those costs will come down, but that we are carrying a contingency of 20.1 million.
And do you also have escalation within your hard cost number too?
Yes.
So you sort of have two places where you're.
Yeah, but at this stage, we can't predict what the cost escalation will be. We are carrying an additional year of escalation on the Broadmeadow School. So if we are able to bid and construct it in one summer, then that's about another.
Any other questions, Louise?
Just, so you said these are based on feasibility estimates. When do you anticipate bidding this?
August.
Did we not fund
the part of the reason why
we're funding the construction now. We funded the design, right?
But only through, we didn't fund the full design?
You didn't fund the CA portion.
We did not.
Yeah, I mean that's why.
No, that's construction administration. Did we not fund through
bid
documents?
Yeah. It's taken a long time to get to where we are today, to go through all the analysis of several different options.
Don't we usually rely on the work that's done prior when we go back to town meeting for the final construction? This is the final construction cost, right?
I mean, the ideal situation is you come to town meeting with a hard bid.
With a hard bid, right? And then you're awarded.
And we don't have a hard bid now because it's taken this time and you haven't been able to get to the bidding process yet. Yeah. So.
Well, let me just ask again, Mr. Chair, does this look like an October?
Well, it does only in the sense it would, but for two things, Jim. One is the 40-week lead time to order this stuff.
And it has to be done this summer.
And it has to be done the following summer. So I think with those two things that it would it wouldn't be possible under this situation to do that. But I do think you will know in October how good those numbers are because you'll have his hard bid by then.
If the bid comes back higher than what's appropriated, then I'm assuming they can't order do the 40-week lead time, right?
Well, what I would expect they would do is they would just go forward with Elliott first, because you have more than enough money to do Elliott, and then come back to us in October with an additional appropriation for Broad Meadow. I expect that's what you would do.
Okay. Are you looking for a vote today, Mr. Chairman?
If you're looking to make a motion, I am.
I'd like to make a motion. We recommend adoption of the warrant article to appropriate for the rooftop unit replacement in the amount of $9 million to be borrowed.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Seconded by Dick. Any questions or comments?
I have one. So it's March now. We have another 2 months before town meeting. If you are further along with the design and have somewhat better numbers or different numbers, I think it would be good to find that out before town meeting.
Okay,
I assume that
Yeah,
you're
we're
going to have
hoping-
the architect or engineer who was working on this continue to work on it over the next 6 weeks. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Anything else on that? Okay, then I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously with that recommendation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
All right, we have 2 more items. Both with Tim McDonald, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hello. So Tim, we have, thank you for coming in.
Sure.
We were on the warrant article for the opioid recovery and mitigation funds.
Yep.
And then setting the annual limits on the revolving funds.
Sure.
And you sent us information.
He ended up being right before the general fund operating budget. So, like, 4 pieces of paper in.
And next time we'll probably have one a little better. Is it before the offering?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So it's appropriate opioid recovery and mitigation funds. See if the town will vote to raise and transfer and appropriate the sum of $217,288 for the purpose of funding opioid recovery and mitigation programs. So just if you give us a quick synopsis on this article. You sent a nice explanation, but
I sent it pretty close to the start of the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. So I did talk to you about it briefly last time I was here for the operating budget. Background, the results of multiple attorneys, state attorneys general settling with pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors, as well as pharmacies themselves. Needham will receive payments depending on the settlements and depending on the payer every year between now and 2038 for some cases, the longest case, 2031, 2033 for some others. It will be sort of an uneven amount over time. So one of the things I'm proposing this year is to spend less than the full year 1 disbursement, for lack of a better word. For 2 reasons. One is to allow for a little bit more of a deliberate planning process, and 2, to allow for sort of smoothing of spending. By not spending all of the money in the first year, we will be able to essentially spend a relatively consistent amount for the 15-year period.
So the 217 is less than what you expect.
No, it's exactly what we have so far.
It's received, it's in the bank.
Okay, but you don't want to spend 217.
I want to spend approximately $70,000 in the first year.
So I probably should know this, but I'm tired. So is there going to be an amendment, or is this to be able to appropriate the sum to the fund, and then there'll be some other action later on to take money out of the fund?
So I would defer to Dave, but this is to move from the money from the general fund to a different account.
It's no special financial warrant article. It's a warrant article. Money stays available to expend for purposes stated until they're done spending it, then it closes out. it can go carry over a fiscal year, unlike the operating budget, which closes out on June 30th.
So the whole 217 goes into this fund,
Right.
and
He's only
and
gonna
that way,
spend some.
that way, it can't go into free cash if it's
Yeah,
not
it has to
spent.
go, right, if it doesn't go into this, it
Right.
go into free cash.
Right. And the reason you're seeing the funding source as free cash is because the money has come in.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's being certified as free cash.
And is there going to be a fund set up? If the balance, if there's a balance at the end of the fiscal year?
Right now, the state considers it a general fund receipt. So like all general fund money, it comes in and just goes to general treasury, and that's what this serves. The state has filed legislation last year, didn't go anywhere. They filed it again to make these type of monies to be accepted without appropriation, be expended for the purpose that the settlement did.
Or you can put it into a stabilization fund
Right.
and have the money go directly into the stabilization fund. And I actually just got an email from DOR because they want to talk to us about how we did that. And we are automatically appropriating into the stabilization fund.
But would that require 2/3 to
Go
vote it out?
to
Yeah.
get it out on an annual basis. You just say, here's what our plan is for the money, and then it comes out.
But it's creating a special stabilization fund.
Right.
But the money's, that doesn't allow you to spend it, that allows you to reserve it for specific.
And to continually,
And then
every
you-
time a check comes in, we can deposit it
Right,
automatically.
but then they would still need to be appropriated. What DOR has filed legislation, just like library aid, it comes in directly under the authority, because the attorney generals want to sue, and the monies by the court order to be spent for specific expenditures and not by the
Specific purposes.
discretion of the appropriation law.
So this legislation would allow the balance to be spent without further
Without
appropriation.
further appropriation.
Okay.
And DOR believes it's probably going to happen because the now governor is the governor that was the attorney
Right.
general that won the case and certainly wants to.
But in any event, the money is there. It's already, so, okay, I make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we recommend adoption of the warrant article to appropriate opioid recovery and mitigation funds in the amount of $217,288.
I have a question before we vote.
Yeah, we'll get it.
Second.
We will have
All
it.
right.
Yeah, that's okay. Second, okay, now we're gonna open up for
All right.
questions. Carly, go ahead.
We want on harm reduction. It says community level uses trainings. Who's being trained?
So we've actually done trainings already, led by our public health nurses. There's been one that was offered to nannies in town. There were 8 nannies that came and took a training. They also took choke saver training. There was another one that was offered generally, and it was generally parents that came, parents often of high schoolers. So we've had 2 classes taught thus far. It's not particularly complicated. This isn't a week-long course. This is an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if we want to give you coffee and a muffin.
I'm just trying to understand the audience. I didn't know if it was for
So
specifically for.
I think the hope is that, in the substance use prevention community, the hope is that this would become as ubiquitous as an AED, and that the number of people who would feel comfortable administering the naloxone if they found someone unresponsive on the street would be quite high.
Do we feel the harm reduction sandbox is necessary in this community, that there needs to be such prevalence of it, where you say 12 of them?
I had the same question.
That seems a little excessive.
So I think, I think it's a balance, right? I think we have AEDs in a lot more places than we used to, because we have determined as a society that the risk of someone having a heart attack and not having access to it is unacceptable. So from a public health and a substance use prevention perspective, I'm sort of approaching it like that. Like, I would like to have a naloxone kit somewhere on this floor in town hall. Given the level that we have current opioid use in Needham, there aren't that many overdoses. So chances are most of them would not be used in any given year. Given the funding we have and given the relatively minor costs, I don't view the having to maintain the kits and update them and switch out the Narcan if it's not administered. I don't view that as sort of an impediment in this instance.
So these categories here, Tim, are these all ones that your determination, or is it the Board of Health, or who's deciding?
So
who's making these decisions in these categories and these amounts of money?
So the amounts of money are estimates. The categories, I think I maybe called it like activity or something, is the terms of the legally defined settlement, the substance use prevention, harm reduction, reducing barriers to treatment. Those are all specified in the terms of the settlement agreement. The initiatives are based on my understanding of our community conditions and the guideline we have from what the state basically said you have to use it for. It's what makes sense in Needham in the first year before we've had a chance to do a sort of longer strategic planning process. What I'm submitting is essentially a placeholder that is my best judgment on how we can start working on this before we can get a lot of people around the table and come up with a more concrete 15-year plan.
Would it make sense for there to be an agreement that you'd come back to the Finance Committee with respect to the request to spend the $70,000? In other words, we'd agree to appropriate the money since it's there and it's the right thing to do, but there'll be a further discussion down the road with respect to what efforts will actually be undertaken.
So that's to your discretion. I tried to outline what I thought was a good first year plan. I do want to, sort of commit to doing a deep sort of community engagement process and coming up with a better 15-year plan. But that wouldn't be for the first 70,000. That would be.
I understand, but what I'm asking is that have that deep plan also include the first 70,000. I mean, it just seems to me that there should be, I think, more of a community discussion with respect to how these monies are spent. It's one thing for the state to say they're available. That's fantastic. Great. Good luck to the governor. But I think now that we have the money, there's nothing wrong with us having an intelligent conversation about what the money should be spent for.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's part of our plan. But my initial plan was start working on some of our low-hanging fruit and then come up with the more detailed plan.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to support this article unless and until there's a commitment from the executive branch to have a further discussion with respect to how the monies will be spent.
Okay, I think that's a good point. I think I'm not looking for the Finance Committee to say how it should be spent, but I think that, and you're not either. You're not saying that
But it has a financial implication.
It does, and I think that it needs to be a little bit, when I look at this thing, and I don't have any issue with what the goals are, but the implementation of it, I think, is worth a lot of discussion. The sandbox initiative is one I just have a very hard time with, just understanding that one, and whether
can I ask a little bit more about, you think there's too many of them, or you think the idea itself is flawed?
I didn't say the word flawed. It's that I just don't think there's enough discussion about it, and I think that it should be at a lot of different levels. And I'd just like to hear more from the executive branch, to Jim's point, about how this is all going to play out, and what the process is, and what the procedures are going to be for how this money is to go forward. So the money's there. We don't need the article to take the money, accept the money, because they give it to us, right? Yep.
We do need the article.
Yeah.
But you
Sure,
need-
it doesn't go into free cash.
It's like,
Right.
yeah.
Well,
$1
no,
million
it
from the
goes
state.
into free cash, but the city or the town, I'm sorry, is still obligated to spend that amount of money. So the 217 becomes part of free cash, but you still have to know that 217 has to be expended on all those different opioid categories.
At some point in time, because right now Tim's only planning for 70 to be spent.
Right.
Right. So
Dave will have to keep track of.
But is
the dollars
there
coming
a
in.
requirement as to when you begin spending these funds?
Yes. Some communities have already started spending in the current
There's no
year.
requirement though.
No, that's what I was asking. Is
The
there a
first
requirement?
fiscal report is due, or the first fiscal report, which is part of our required settlement, is due next year. They're going to distribute the report form in July, and I believe it's due by the end of the calendar year, but I'm not positive on that part.
As to how you spent money.
As how you've spent so far. And annual fiscal reports for any community that's receiving more than $35,000 a year is required to submit annual reports detailing how they've spent the money, who they've engaged in a process, how they've specifically looked at racial and ethnic disparities, how they've looked at justice system involved persons, that sort of thing.
So I guess
But the point is, you've already said you don't have to spend the full $217,000.
Or even a penny.
So we may need to submit a report, but the report simply just has to delineate what it is that the town expects to do with the monies. And to the extent there have been any that are spent, we can make that declaration itself. Listen, I'm all in favor of doing things that will do something to help abate this crisis, which I do believe is a crisis. But the point of the matter is, I don't have enough information tonight to say that I agree with the use of the 70,000.
Yeah.
You indicated that the enabling legislation of the settlement agreement specified the categories on which, so by definition, we have limits on what we can spend the money. Is there any indication on the percentage allocation of those categories, or so that's totally flexible?
It is. There is encouragement and guidance saying, federal funds, for example, can't be used largely for harm reduction. So because these funds are more flexible, you should think about using them for harm reduction. There's a 7-page memo that basically lays out the spending categories and then gives examples of potential projects, but the actual discretion on which projects are appropriate for your community is left to your community.
There are examples of how other communities have allocated. Is that public information yet, or is it too early? It will
be public information, but not many people have gotten that far in spending yet.
And are you planning on hiring someone to, like a consultant, or?
So the first year plan was going to involve a recovery coach. So that would be a part-time staff person.
To be funded each year until 2038 out of these funds?
I meant to come up with a plan, to help you come up with a plan.
Right now, I think we have sufficient expertise and staff in-house to have a community engagement process and come up with a plan. But it's a fair question. And maybe, I would come and say, I need $15,000 to engage a consultant to help us do that.
Mr. Chair, so maybe I'm thinking about this a little differently. We received funds from a settlement because presumably people in Needham have been harmed because they've had opioid addiction or they have died based upon opioids.
No,
okay.
That was not the reason for the allocation.
Okay, so maybe I'm operating on an incorrect assumption then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just done by what, population? Is that what it is, demographic?
I think, so in my opinion, the intent of your question is correct, that there was a societal level of harm done by opioid manufacturers who hid the addictive nature of their prescription drugs. And therefore, because there were settlements,
not specific to Needham.
No.
Yeah, but Tim, I understand the societal impact. I understand all that. My question is, how did Needham get 271,000?
That was population.
Okay, that's what I just said. And I don't understand why I say something, why you can't just say yes. I mean, I'm sorry I'm frustrated, but it's 9 o'clock and I'm tired. So Josh, there's your answer.
Okay, so perhaps it's not related to specific individuals in Needham, but there's some sort of pro rata allocation based upon expected harm.
No, it has nothing to do with harm.
Okay.
But I guess that's where I'm confused, because I think it does.
Yeah.
No, because
statistically say if you get the population this size, you're going to have a certain amount of impact.
Could be, yeah. There's no evidence of specific harm is what I'm trying to get at here.
We do have evidence of specific harm. We have police overdoses. We have reports of Narcan administered by police and fire. Now, is that harm proportional to the amount of money we got? I don't exactly know. This is based on the formula they came up with of however many cents per population.
Right.
But I think, I guess, to your question, okay, that's the answer to your question.
Okay, so
is it? I guess I misunderstood. I thought you were saying why generally is any community receiving funding, and it's because there's sort of a societal impact from opioids.
Yeah. So my point is that if there is harm, and I think there is harm that has been caused in Needham by opioids, I think we have a duty to expend these funds. I don't think.
Well, I don't think that's.
No, I am.
Nobody's questioning that. It's just a question of.
For what?
For what?
Yeah, for what?
How best to use these funds for the specific issues that Needham has.
Mhm.
And that's really just, I think we need to dig in a little deeper. How the funds got here is a separate issue from if you wanted to address the opioid problems in Needham, what would you want money for specifically?
How is it any different than the CPC? It's the
Yeah,
same thing.
it is.
The CPC is a tax. The money comes into the CPC committee, and then they come to town meeting and the finance committee, the selectmen, they say, here's what we think these monies should be used for. So I think all I'm saying is there should be a similar discussion with respect to how these funds are going to be expended.
I don't disagree. And I think, and this chart kind of, I think shows the reason why that discussion has to take place. And I'd like to hear what the Board of Health has to say on it. I'd like to hear what the select board has to say on it.
And police and fire.
Fire, what they have to say, because they might say that the most important thing for them is to have, you know, more people within their staff to better handle this, or more Narcan. I'm not trying to be political, but I just think I'd like to have more people involved in this. At least I would want to have more people involved to say they weighed in and they think this either these or a different set of categories is the right way to spend the funds.
So
That's correct for Needham.
Yeah.
Sure. So we have conferred with police, fire, youth and family services, and library at a department head level. I have conferred with the Board of Health as the Director of Health and Human Services. Now, should the process be larger? I think it should. And that's what I was proposing for the 15 years, coming up with a strategic plan that involves a lot of stakeholder input. But I didn't pull, these aren't my own sort of just me talking to myself, coming up with ideas. These are based on our discussion. Police and fire essentially said, we don't have any immediate needs with opioids right now. We get Narcan through this program. We have this training. Right now, we don't have any asks, Tim, for this pot of money, is what both the police chief and the fire chief told me.
But do the police chief and fire chief really think, for example, that it's a good idea to have sandboxes around in different parts of buildings and other places in the town?
I did mention the initiative, and they
So
didn't
I'd like
object to
hear from them on
sandbox.
that. I'm not quite sure that's, if they do that, that they would be, that's something they would be in favor of. So to me, it's that roundabout, making sure everyone's all on the same page and understanding the full discussion of it, I think is
okay.
Would be helpful to me at least. And I think I'm hearing other people say the same thing. Okay, so
I would ask then, Mr. Chair, that my motion be deferred.
Okay.
Tabled, whatever.
That's what I was going to ask you to do that too.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't you maybe on your end talk about, I think,
sure.
Come back to us.
I guess I'd like to understand what you're looking to have seen, or what sort of a document or a...
No.
Mr. Chairman, maybe you can have this conversation offline.
I'll take care of it.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, Jim, hang in there. We're almost done. Okay.
I am, but I think we've been very clear on a number of different things during the discussion, and I'm not sure it's fair to the committee that we be pushed in a certain way.
The revolving funds limitations, is that in a warrant article?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It's after the operating budget.
One page further.
Okay, I see it.
And then an entire table.
So this is just the components of the each Health and Human Services, their components of the revolving.
Yes, if I may, I'll just first start. And the reason why Tim is here is generally what we have is this is a recurring article, and it's just to reauthorize the same dollar amount for the various revolving funds. That is true for the public work, for the public facility use, the tree replacement, school transportation, home composting, water conservation. But the immunization program, traveling meals, the Needham transportation program, and aging services programs and youth services programs, those articles which come under one of the one or more of the divisions within HHS. What they're seeking is a different spending limit in FY24 over 25. Some are declining, some are increasing, and Tim is here to explain what those funds are for and why they think they need to increase or decrease.
But in none of those instances do they affect, these are funds that are, they're not tax funds.
They're not tax funds, they're the monies that people pay.
And so it's allowing
to
you to
participate. Correct.
Okay, Tim, the first one is, the biggest jump is in immunization.
Sure.
And that's probably because the grants and other types of things are no longer going to be available.
Sure. So federal funding for COVID vaccines is not going to be in place. It's not going to be in place very soon, but there will be a supply that will last probably through late August. If we're talking about vaccinations for COVID in October and November, we will have to purchase vaccines and pay a price for the actual vaccine, and then we will administer them. We have historically only done this for flu. Right now, the going rate, and there's still negotiations at the federal level, is $125 a dose for the COVID vaccine, for single dose. So that would be substantial cost. That's why the request for a significant increase in the amount allowed under immunization.
And is there a revenue source? What is the revenue source for that?
So we bill insurance. When we get a free COVID vaccine from the federal government, we bill insurance for the cost of administering it. When we pay for a flu shot, we bill your insurance for the cost of the vaccine and for our administration of the vaccine in your arm.
Okay, so presumably we'll be billing insurance.
There's no tax dollars involved.
Right.
Correct.
You're simply spending the money you bring in.
Yeah. Right. But we need to give them a higher limit.
I got it.
On that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand where the money's coming from.
Any other questions that people have on those?
Not on the immunization.
Okay, you had one on one of the other ones, Dick?
Yeah, just I didn't understand the aging service. It sounded like your explanation was the cost was going up.
Sure.
Yeah, this spending limit's going down. So I
Yep.
get confused.
Yep. So COVID changed a lot of what we do when we reduced significantly the number of programs, especially the number of in-person programs we had for a period of time. We're at the point now in start of fiscal 24, where we will be offering essentially everything we offered in person plus more, and we will still be doing some remote and hybrid programs. So our spending is growing based on, I think I showed expenditures in last fiscal year of like $20,000.
Yeah.
So we're growing. We're not nearly back to $90,000. Based on the estimates we have, we will spend between $50,000 and $75,000 next fiscal year, if allowed. And so I want to tell you that it's, you're going to ask me, well, if you're only spending 20, why do you need 75? And I guess what I want to say is we are growing, but we definitely don't need the 90.
So this is an expenditure limit. I'm not sure why we need to be modifying these really, unless we know for sure that this is what we need to modify.
That's what I was going to ask the same question, Tim. I mean, I appreciate your being intellectually honest with us, but why not just keep it at 90?
Yeah.
Because
and then
it's still no tax dollars. You just can only spend what you raise.
So maybe I misunderstood. I thought there was some implication with the total value, so that if I'm asking for roughly the same, and I can show that some are going up and some going down, that I basically am offsetting, and I'm not asking.
In fairness to Tim, that's me.
So you've seen historically that they're not reaching that level. Correct. Okay. And now I have a problem with it going down.
Yes. Okay with that? Yeah. All right.
But what about transportation though? That seems like a huge reduction.
So we get very little revenue from transportation. It's almost entirely so there's a voluntary donation if you are picked up to go to the senior center. The only sort of hard fees we have are for out of town trips, like they go to, I think, the Walmart in Walpole for Christmas shopping, and I think it's a $3 charge or something. The amount of money we take in is very modest. There is a limited amount of money, and I don't remember off the top of my head, in the operating budget for fuel, obviously, but also for vehicle repairs and maintenance. And over the last 3 fiscal years, that has been, the operating budget has been sufficient, so we haven't had to tap into the program revolving account for any expenses. I would still like to have the option to potentially spend some money out of it, but it can be a lot less than.
But you're not getting the revenue to spend regardless.
There's very, very little money's coming in, and right now no money is going out.
You're looking, yeah.
Do we have to hear, Mr. Chairman, from the others?
No, because the others are all staying the same.
Okay.
So we can vote on.
I would make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we vote to recommend adoption of the warrant article to set the annual department revolving fund spending limits as set forth in the warrant.
So I would just say that this is much more likely to go by unanimous consent if we don't have such significant reductions. Oh, I'm sorry, there was supposed to be a second first.
All right.
Second,
Second,
then I can make my comment. I think we're much more likely to see this go by unanimous consent if there aren't significant.
Unless it's explained well in the warrant.
It has to be explained really well.
Yeah, and people won't read or listen.
Right. So that's my only comment. I have no issue with it, but
Shocking that you want to manipulate the warrant.
I don't want to get to unanimous consent.
Okay. Any further question on it? And hearing none, coming to a vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. We're done with that one. We have one more thing, reserve fund transfer request from David.
Chairman.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
That will teach you to be responsible, Tim, by the way.
I've learned my lesson. Mr. Chairman, I have a reserve fund transfer request for the finance department, specifically in technology. It's $105,180. Quickly stating, we've had both the departure of our IT director and network manager, and as a result, a high-end level support and needing to use outside services. Also, with this opportunity of having two key positions vacated at the same time, and before giving any consideration to filling it, we're looking to see if there's alternative ways that we can provide technological support on a town-wide basis. I've reached out to the school department, and we're actually going to be seeking a consultant to come in and look at the model that we have currently, which is basically two different systems. We have the school IT department and the town IT department, to see if there's some synergies of having a single IT department. Of course, as you would expect, the school can be a little concerned to ensure that the service levels they have are not going to be diminished. And having an outsider look at it, the consultant, we're putting together bid specs now. We hope to have something known within the next 4 weeks in terms of cost. And hence, as noted in this, I intend to come to the committee for reserve fund transfer for a known number for that consultant. But this is specifically for services we need for an interim period for at least 6 months. Fiscal year left is 4 months. This is only representing 4 months of cost. The key critical things that we are relying upon these services for is the after-hour support, particularly in the area of public safety, the modal data terminals out in the cruises, the medical lookup equipment that the fire department relies upon, the systems that are in our sewer pump stations and such, if there's communication links and brokerage or network interference. That's what these all call services are, as well as being available for our low-level staff to rely upon to deal with communication issues. And to be clear, it's not about software applications. Each one of them has a license. The different companies support the software. This is the communication between the computer and where the data or applications reside. And
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adopt the request for reserve fund transfer in the amount of $105,180 for the stated purpose in the request.
Second.
Any discussion? Josh?
Just a mechanical question. Why is it preferred to do a reserve fund transfer versus a transfer from salary savings from the salary?
that was just the last thing I was going to mention is it's there's not enough time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have, if normally we would on this May special town meeting, transfer money from salaries to expenses. I need to execute this contract this week. And that's why. So I'll have a surplus salaries, but nothing expensive because those positions are vacant in the $80,000 range. So this is still even more expensive than that, but it's significantly offset.
There's an offset there.
Yes.
Any
Mr.
other
Chair,
questions?
just one question.
Yep.
Two-part. So when going through the town manager's budget and the select board budget, they have a DSR 5.
I was gonna say the same thing. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think if
For outside recruiting services,
Yeah.
and then a second DSR 5 for temporary staffing. Would either of those, if they were in place, have been helpful with respect to this?
This specific area, no.
Okay.
so, but yeah, sorry.
Thank you, because it's sort of related, but it's still going to be reserve fund transfer. We will be withdrawing the fellowship article for consideration for the Springtown meeting in part, because there's going to be some costs associated with consulting.
Okay.
So, but I think that the outside recruitment services, if they are needed, can be handled through the reserve fund.
I think that's exactly correct, which is why I asked it, because I think this is a perfect example of why you don't need to add.
You don't
to the
need
budget
to add,
when
exactly.
you've got $2 million in the reserve fund. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any further questions on discussion on this one? We'll come to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further business? Motion to adjourn?
I'm going to make a motion to adjourn in 1 second. I have, and I apologize if I have totally lost on this. I have not been following the discussion of the quiet zone, and I see that it is in the warrant. And have I been, I'm sorry, maybe I just haven't, well, there's no paper to read, but is there, has there been any presentation or discussion about this? Well, I mean, it's March 8th, right?
I agree.
Okay.
Where did that come from? Because I've been asked about it and I said, I've never heard about it here.
It's never come to us.
So it has come to the finance committee back in, what year was that? 2000.
But it
has been
on the list of select board priorities.
And it was voted down by town meeting. Last time it came.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Yes.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carly, it hasn't come to us.
Oh.
So
This
we-
year,
The
this
train
year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a train.
That annoying thing.